Welcome, Tom.
Well, glad to be here, Richard.
Well,
Thanks.
I have a question for you. From the point of view of good science, how did you conclude that the purpose of our being in this virtual reality is love?
Well, that would take a little while to explain, but let me start. That falls logically out of the understanding, one, that consciousness is fundamental, that consciousness is an information system. Um, Given that consciousness is an information system, and that the information systems need to evolve by lowering their entropy, that means getting rid of randomness. Well, let's see, maybe I could put it another way. If you have no information, that means all your bits are random. As you get rid of randomness, you can have information. Information is order, it's structure. It's things that persist and have meaning, or symbolize or have significance to somebody. So in an information system, randomness is no information. So we have this larger consciousness system, and what it needs to do is lower its entropy. Entropy is a measure of disorder. Okay, so if you have a lot of randomness, then you have high entropy but low information. So now we have an information system called consciousness that needs to lower its entropy. And one of the ways it does this is to break itself into pieces, like cell division in our biology, and interact with the various pieces. Okay, now that forms a social system. That's the larger consciousness system. And in order to minimize entropy, which means the system can evolve, as opposed to raising entropy, which means the system is de-evolving, and eventually, if it keeps raising entropy, it dies. It becomes totally random. Well, in a social system, the way you lower entropy is by cooperation, caring. It becomes about other rather than about self. And if you work the logic of that problem, that's then what I call love. Love is about other. Fear is about self. Love and fear being opposites. So it comes out of this logical chain. Now, I just skipped over a whole bunch of steps and kind of started in the middle, but the idea that our purpose here is to evolve, to survive, if you will, as consciousness, and we do that by lowering entropy, which means cooperation, caring, compassion. It has to be about other, not about self. When things are about self, that's a high entropy path. When it's about other, that's a low entropy path for social organizations. So that's really the logical chain that gets to the point that our purpose here is to evolve our consciousness, to survive as consciousness, and to do that, we need to become love, which is different than just acting loving. It's not about acting. It's not about what you can do with your intellect. It's about being. It's about who you are. So becoming love is really our mission here.
This is Andrew. Today, Richard's co-host, and we want to thank you so much for coming on the air today and taking the time out of your schedule. Just so you know, if you didn't know already, our show is dedicated to regenerative systems and circular economy and social economy. So we're very much up your alley in terms of striving for a higher order of social organization that will be free of unnecessary entropy. And so we would be interested now and again through our discussion of basic natures of the universe as to how you feel these principles can be applied. These fundamental principles of nature can be applied to economic systems, although you don't have to stray too far from your familiar ground if that's a stretch for you.
No, that's not a stretch at all. They apply very strongly, very dramatically, actually, to economic systems. You can imagine an economic system where all the players in the system, all the stakeholders, all the economic units within the system are caring. They want to build things together. If somebody has information, they share it if it's good information, if it's helpful information, because that helps the whole get stronger. And as the whole gets stronger, then the individuals get stronger. As the whole progresses and evolves, then individuals have more and more choices, more things they can do, more options that they can pursue. So it's like, it's not that you have a cake and you have to divide up, who gets what. It's that the cake keeps growing and growing because everyone's working together to grow the cake. So that is kind of in the big picture how it affects economics. It's a very cooperative, caring, low entropy system, as opposed to the system we have now, where it's everybody for himself, which is a very self-centered system. What can I do to get as much as I can for me, and what do I have to do to keep that stuff so others can't take it away from me or so I don't lose it? So it's all self-focused. It's all about me and what I can get. It's not about what I can contribute to the whole. So that kind of an economic system is a very high entropy system. It's fear-based. There's very little trust in it. It's self-centered, and it has tremendous limitations. As soon as one group of people find out something that's helpful, that's good, that they, in an economic system that they can sell, if you like, or that it has need or demand, others then, rather than, wanting to make that better or improve it or whatever, they want to take it. They want to somehow stop that other person from getting more market share. They want to pass laws that prohibit what that person's doing, or they want to copy it. Anyway, it's rather than having a system that works together to make as much as possible for everybody, we have an economic system that is very individual-based, and that makes it a very limited system. And it's a system where abuse of the system is expected. Where you have everybody out for themselves, you will have some individuals that gain more and more power, and as they continue to be out for themselves, then they get more and more of the pie, and eventually you end up with, what do we have, 5% of the people owning 95% of the wealth, that sort of thing. So it becomes an abusive system after a while.
Well, what concerns...
A low entropy system is always much better than a high entropy system.
What concerns me most is that we've not learned to pattern our economic systems after nature, which is a regenerative system, producing, some say over $30 trillion in ecosystem goods and services for us every year, free of charge, that we are whittling away now, and that's the only reason we can measure them, because they've been whittled down to such a point that they're becoming scarce. And I'm largely concerned about the long-term implications, or even the short-term implications, of our not having a sense that nature is the pre-existent model after which all of our economic systems and other systems need to be patterned. Now, how does love exemplify itself in nature, in this continued giving that it demonstrates?
Okay, well, when we talk about love, of course, among humans, we're talking about the human capacity to to interact with its consciousness, its decision space, all the things that it can do, all the choices that it has. When we get out into nature, we find that in general, relationships between things in nature probably have fewer choices. So it's not exactly the same model as with the human. But in nature, we find that there is, cooperation is still the fundamental thing going on. You have biomes and ecosystems wherein there's literally, hundreds of thousands of entities and things, and they're all in some sort of cooperative interaction with each other. And in nature, when we have one of those systems is non-cooperative, it just say takes and takes and takes as much as it can, what do we call that? We call that, in our physical systems, we call that cancer. In a general, biology, you call that a parasite. It takes without giving back. If you have that unbalance, if it's not cooperative, that you have to work with the whole so that everything gets along and optimizes as a whole, then, that's a parasite. That's a cancer. That's something that is destructive of the system. So we have those things in our system, but generally in nature, we don't see a lot of that. Yes, there's parasites, but that's not the majority of life. That's not the big picture in biology. But that's the difference. So love in the natural world is going to come out as, cooperation. It's going to come out as sharing, seeing how you get along with others, what you can do for others, and what they can do for you, and you build up a kind of an optimal system of
symbiosis,
an environment that everybody can flourish in.
Like symbiosis and.
Yes, exactly. Symbiosis. Everything gets along by sharing and doing part of the work. Now, it's interesting you brought that up because there's a fellow in Australia named Richard Bain, and he is an economist, and he has taken this fundamental concept of nature and the way nature works and has spent the last 3 or 4 years producing a book about the optimal economic system for we humans, based on following kind of the natural way of things on a low entropy trajectory. And I think he's only, maybe about a year or so from publishing that. So there's other people besides yourselves working on this exact same problem, and eventually I'm sure you'll all hear about each other and work together.
Great. Thank you very much for that. It totally aligns with what Andrew and a lot of people in this area are concerned about. Another area that we all are concerned about is healing. And in your fireside chat of May 2017, you spoke of healing, how you can heal yourself and others. So I wanted to ask you, with your understanding of how things work in My Big Toe, how can you heal yourself and others?
Well, it turns out that and now we're still, 20 steps downstream in the logic. All the My Big Toe is very logical. It's very science-based. It's not descriptive, and it's not, there's not like a bunch of assumptions in it. There's only 2 assumptions, and that's that consciousness exists and evolution exists. Other than that, it's all just deductive logic. So we're kind of far down chain, and we don't have time to go through all that. But it turns out in our reality, what we call our physical universe, it turns out that is a virtual reality. It's a computed reality, and that's something that science is agreeing with more and more every day. That's become kind of a standard viewpoint in physics departments all over the world now, because that's what the experiments say. It's not that they really like that, it's that that's the way the world works. That's what the experiments are telling them. So anyway, given that this is a virtual reality, one of the aspects or one of the properties of this virtual reality is that there is this database called the Future Probable Database. And what it is a collection of all the things that could happen and the probability that they might happen. And that's the way this big virtual reality is run. It has a function of when you want to have something new going on, something that hasn't happened before, you take a random draw from a probability distribution of the possibilities. That's kind of the cornerstone of how the virtual reality is put together. So what that means then is we have this set of probabilities for the future. Now, we have free will, so the future is not a done deal. It's just a probable future. It can change. We can make decisions with our free will that aren't what was thought we might make. It wasn't part of that probability distribution. When that case happens, then the probabilities get recalculated. But anyway, we have, as a feedback in this virtual reality that we live in, and this virtual reality we live in, you can think of it as like an entropy reduction trainer We're here as pieces of consciousness to learn how to become love, to lower our entropy, to evolve the quality of our consciousness. And as feedback in this system, with our intent, we can modify future probability. That's how the placebo effect works. The placebo effect, which is a very standard part of science, particularly in medicine. You can't sell a product in a pharmaceutical unless it can beat the placebo effect. The placebo effect is a mind affects matter. It's what we think, what we believe modifies how the physical body works. And that works because we are able to modify future probability with our intent. So if you have an intent that is to heal, or an intent is to be healthier, then you will tend to be healthier. If you have an intent that's very positive, your life tends to be more positive. If you're one of these people that's constantly wrapped up in self-pity and woe is me and everything happens to me, why me, life sucks, then your life will tend to suck. It will tend to be unpleasant. A lot of unpleasant things will happen to you. It's also the power of positive thinking, which is a book written many decades ago. That works because we can modify future probability with our intent. So we can heal with our minds. Our minds are very powerful, and the things that we put energy into with our intent tend to have a higher probability of taking place.
Do you think that any of the work of Bruce Lipton and others in the field of epigenetics have been able to draw a nexus between the mind and the evolutionary path of the human being? And I don't just, I mean, like, are we able to hold this kind of consciousness better over time due to some fundamental changes in our physical makeup that are engendered by those attitudes, or anything like that? Has any study?
Yes, indeed. This is evolution. Evolution is constantly changing, and we are in a process of growing up, and we're in a process of changing. So the more you have positive thoughts, the more you have positive intent in your consciousness, then your body changes to reflect that. And what Bruce Lipton has discovered and talks about now for a decade or more is that the mind is really the master in this. It's not the body. It's not that the body leads and then the mind follows. It's the other way around. It's the way you think. It's your attitudes. It's the mental processes that drive physical processes. So yes, it is all changing and it is growing. So evolution is a very slow process. When we talk about evolution and evolution of humans, you talk about something in a time frame of a million years or hundreds of thousands of years. So to look at it over a decade, it's hard to see what you'd call progress. Sometimes you even look at it and say, "Well, we're not doing too well here as human beings. We're not evolving very much." But if you look back 300 years of how life was then, you'll see we have evolved quite a bit, and we're still evolving. We're still changing. And as we change from our mental and our consciousness, our bodies are changing at the same time to support that. So, yeah, it's a constant flow of change toward evolution as opposed to de-evolution.
Yeah, I think that what you're saying is proven out by just looking at history in the near term, not millions of years, but just in terms of thousands of years. If you compare the Roman era to the present era, you had slavery, you had widespread destruction of human beings, not caring about human beings. Go even earlier than that, and you have societies where human life was very unimportant, and you have a leader who gets everything and everybody else is a slave, essentially, the pharaohs and that kind of thing. Compare that to today's society, and we have some of that in some corners of the earth, but it's not as widespread as it was only 2,000 or 3,000 years ago. So we can see a generalized evolution over time in that short term.
Absolutely.
The other thing I wanted to ask you about is the proof, the scientific proof of intent being mind over matter. The work that was done on the double slit experiment seems to me to prove that intention can affect matter. And I'd like you to go into that a little bit because I know you've done quite a few experiments recently. In fact, I've been following them that go into various aspects of the proof that your mind can control matter, or it has an effect on matter, the probable matter.
Yes. Okay. What took place with this model, this my big toe model that I wrote, was it started out to be mostly a model of consciousness, kind of a theory of consciousness, and I did that, though I'm a physicist and have worked all my life as a professional physicist. At the same time, I was a consciousness researcher, all the same time I was a physicist. I started both careers about the same time. So I wanted to put those two together. How is it that consciousness and the things that one can do with one's mind, how does that connect to the physical reality? So I wrote my books about consciousness and found out about 2 years after I published them, just thinking about it, and somebody said something to me that just kind of gave me an aha moment, that the very same ideas and principles and concepts that I had in my theory of consciousness also solved the outstanding physics problems. If you looked at physics, if you looked at the physical world in exactly the same way, I could come up with solutions to what we call them paradoxes that had been in physics for almost 100 years, things that physicists just couldn't understand, just didn't know how to describe, and suddenly it all falls out. So once you understand consciousness as a computational thing, as an information system, us in a virtual reality, then from that virtual reality perspective, you can see quantum mechanics as a rational science, not the weird science that scientists claim that it is today. They say the quantum mechanics is weird science. It does things that just are, unexpected. Nobody can explain why it would do that.
Like spooky action at a distance.
Action at a distance is one of those things. Yes, action at a distance. You do something here and something happens there. To talk to that, scientists came up with the concept of a field. All right, so action at a distance has to do with fields. We have an electric field that goes from here to there, and that's why that's why those iron filings line up the way they do. It's because we have an electromagnetic field that goes from one to the other. But that's nonsense. You see, a field doesn't really exist. It's a mathematical structure. It's not a physical structure. It doesn't have any weight. It doesn't have any smell. You can't touch it. You can't feel it. All you can do is measure an effect at a distance, and the mathematics is just predicting what that effect will be. It's not causing it. You see, there's a big difference between predicting and causing, right? I can predict the sun will come up in the morning, but that doesn't mean I caused the sun to come up in the morning. Well, math can predict a value, say, of a force on a charge at a distance, but it doesn't cause it. The math doesn't cause that force. It just predicts it. So there are no fields. Fields are, just an imaginary thing. They don't exist. So action at a distance is there because this is a computed reality. And information exists at various points in space. Information based on a rule set. And the math just mimics parts of the rule set. So that's the way, science has a lot of those things that just don't seem to make sense. And quantum mechanics, the double slit experiment, was one where you throw particles through slits, and for some reason that's unknown, and they say just weird science, those particles will distribute themselves in a diffraction pattern for no apparent reason. And that says very clearly that our reality is not materialistic. It's not not a material reduction philosophy that explains our reality. It's probabilistic. Well, this virtual reality is a probabilistic virtual reality. And I started with quantum mechanics, and then I went to explains the double slit experiment, explains why quantum mechanics actually is rational and not weird at all. And then I went to relativity, which has a big mystery there. Why should the velocity of light be a constant? Everything else, every other velocities are additive. What I mean by that is if you're going 10 miles an hour, you put your hand out the window of your car that's going 10 miles an hour and throw a ball another 10 miles an hour, then that ball's going 20 miles an hour relative to the ground. It gets 10 miles an hour from the car and 10 miles an hour from your throw. Velocities are additive, but not light. It doesn't matter what the source. It doesn't matter how fast your flashlight's going. That light will only travel C. Nothing else in our reality works that way, and that was a big mystery. Well, once you understand virtual reality, you realize that you have it's like pixels. You have a grid. You have the smallest time, which is a quantum of time, and the smallest piece of volume, which is a quantum of volume, and you can only move one quantum of distance for one quantum of time, and that's as fast as you can go. So every virtual reality has a speed limit, and ours is the speed of light. So once I got it, that once you understood consciousness, you could also better understand physics, then I started solving all these other problems of physics. So as it turns out, this idea of virtual reality, the idea that love is the reason why we're here, to become love, all of that together produces a logic that does better physics. So that then gives me a warm feeling that maybe the metaphysical part of that with the consciousness is probably right, because the physics comes downstream in the logic. So you don't get correct answers in a logic, in a logic stream. You don't get correct answers downstream if you have nonsense upstream. It doesn't work that way. And I've been able to solve all those physics problems. And yes, I have a bunch of physics experiments out that I'm hoping that I can get physics departments to do, which will pretty much prove and verify that these ideas are right. So that's looking forward to that. I even got another experiment I haven't published yet that I probably will put out in the next couple of months.
Well, more power to you in those experimental arenas, because I really feel that observing nature directly is one of the ways that we're going to advance our science, and you really need that feedback from.
Absolutely, it's the experiments that define truth. The way the experiment works is the way the world works. If it's a good experiment, then that's ground truth.
Well, my mentor of many years was a man named Bruce De Palma. I don't know if you've ever heard of him, but
No.
he was, shall we say, a dissident scientist in that he was part of the free energy research community. But he used to say the experimenter is the result of his experiment, which is quite interesting. I think that there is a kind of inevitable truth-telling that we have to do, like you have. You couldn't ignore the influence of consciousness in this so-called material reality after you gathered enough data. And it seems to me the nonlinearity of physical laws is also something worthy of consideration, like the work of Ilya Prigogine, who won the Nobel Prize for non-equilibrium thermodynamics in certain, chemical reactions. You're familiar?
Yeah, and chaos. Chaos is probably the most nonlinear thing that we know about, and
Right.
our world is full of it when you get down into the detail.
Which means that under certain conditions, entropy can be reversed or suspended, at least during an autopoietic moment in a chemistry reaction where certain self-organizing principles prevail. And I'm certainly hoping that our society is able to develop more of a self-organizing axis of understanding and the evolutionary imperative of building a society that actually works for everybody becomes front and center instead of the more entropic, self-centered, fear-based realities.
Yes. Well, the good news there is that that is going to happen. We are going to get there because that is, that's our direction. That is what, we are evolving toward. And evolution may be slow, but it's also very persistent. It just keeps grinding on and on. Even if you take a few steps backward, evolution still keeps grinding on and on toward a more optimal configuration, a more optimal solution. So we will get there. That's a given. Now, what we don't know is how long is it going to take. Is it going to take another couple of decades or another couple of millennia or what? But we will get there one day because that is the positive direction of evolution.
Well, great. I agree with you on that. When you talked about the person growing up, and when he's worked through his ego by confronting the beliefs that empower his self-centeredness, what is next for him or her after they transition out of this PMR, this physical matter reality? Even if he comes back to be a saint and he learned as much as he can learn here, what happens then? I'm curious about that.
Okay, well, the idea is that we are to be cooperative and helpful to others, right? It's about others. So it's not really just about ourselves. It's not that we get rid of our fear and our ego and our beliefs, and then we're done. Okay, what next? Well, we're not done. As long as there's other people who haven't gotten rid of their fear, ego, and beliefs, then we are needed to help, to be part of the solution. And so it doesn't end or doesn't quit just because we make progress. We have to continue to work with others and be a part of others and live in, with, and mingle with others until we can get everybody to work that way. And now what happens when everybody gets that way? Well, it's not a closed system. There's new individuated units of consciousness coming into the system all the time. And we live in a virtual reality, and our virtual reality is not the only virtual reality. There are many virtual realities in this larger consciousness system in which you can interact and learn and grow. But basically, it doesn't end. We don't get to a terminal point where what we do is sit on a cloud and play a harp. We don't get to a point where we just cease to exist and meld into the larger consciousness system. We keep working, we keep evolving, we keep helping other people evolve, and there's really no end to that I see.
I have a question.
It's a system that grows.
I have a follow-up question to that. I have studied a few unusual thinkers like Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, in which he posited in his work, The Phenomenon of Man, he posited something called the omega point, which he suggested was the trajectory of human consciousness leading towards a coalescence or concrescence of awareness and reflection. So, I think humanity might actually just be in the starting gate right now, just trying to gather its forces, and that when we finally determined that we're here for each other, then we can ring that bell and start the race, because we've been depriving ourselves of immense self-realization and the potential for self-organization by virtue of our tendency to be more entropic and to be at odds with one another. But what would happen? And I don't think this is a theoretical question, what will happen when we have liberated ourselves from all those constraints? I mean, there's really no telling.
Well, that would be hard to say. That's so far outside of our, of the information that we've got that are really hard to tell. But we can, look at it in terms of a series of evolution. If we look at evolution in the in the primordial seas, we had single-celled things, and they had to cooperate to become multi-celled things, which then had to cooperate at a higher level of cooperation to become multi-celled things with specialization, like the heart and the lungs and the locomotion power and the defense and the motion, and all these various parts had to cooperate. And now we get to the point that, here we are humans, and we're one of these creatures that has lots of different parts and organs and so on that all have to cooperate with all those cells. Now, the next step is for us to cooperate on another level entirely with other humans until we make like one larger thing. Now, that was not like we're all going to be cemented shoulder to shoulder like the bacteria were to make a jellyfish. That's not the way we are. We function at a higher level of consciousness than that. So we will form something that will be very positive. It'll be optimized for everybody. And when we get optimized for everybody in this reality, then what do we do next? Well, we go up to the next level of congregation, the next level of coming together. And that will be, if there's other things going on in this galaxy, maybe we then will have to do that same sort of thing of getting together and becoming one with other beings, other places. And if not there, then within other virtual realities. So there's, it just goes on and on and on. It's hard to see that there's an end point to the growth potential of consciousness.
Well, I'm not sure Chardin was suggesting it'd be the end. It was more like a new beginning where...
Every stage is a new beginning. When the bacteria formed multi-celled animals, that was a whole new beginning for multi-celled animals. And look what they did. They turned into, lots and lots of wonderful things. And then when it became the individuation of tasks for these cooperative things, and that turned in, it was a whole new beginning, yes, for a whole different sort of creatures could then be created, and it goes on like that. So when we get together, it'll be just the beginning for a whole new set of ways of existing that are hard for us to imagine at this point that will happen after that. He's exactly right.
Yeah, and what I think we're looking at in terms of the question I had before is as we grow up, as we become more conscious, we then are helping others. So we have at all different levels of growing up. There's some people who are very young, some people who are very wise and old. And so all of the philosophical ideas we've had in the past, like angels and getting help from quote the gods or God, are all part of this concept. As a person evolves, he now ends up coming back. If he comes back into this density, he's now helping others, and he's what's considered a saint, or if he isn't obvious and he's just helping, well, the person who's been helped says, well, I had an angel help me. But these are really just beings who are either material or non-material, depending upon what they need to do at that particular stage of their evolution. But we're always, it seems like we're getting help, and we have the capability of getting help. We just have to ask, and that goes back to the question of intent. So if you ask for help, you tend to get it.
Yes, absolutely. We're part of this larger consciousness system. This system isn't a machine. It's an aware consciousness. It has also free will, and we are part of its strategy for evolution. Here we are in this entropy reduction trainer, and as we evolve, it evolves because we're just a part of it. So we're it, it's us, and we all kind of evolve together.
Right, and the thing about miracles that people have talked about, they're breaking the laws of physics. Miracles, somebody levitates or something materializes in front. That's not supposed to happen. However, if in the higher consciousness system feels that that is going to further the evolution in some way and not be detrimental, then the larger consciousness system has the free will to make that, to change the rule set momentarily. And that's where we have these momentary things that people have written about throughout history that were not possible. So that's where I think that comes from.
Yeah, absolutely. You see, when you have a virtual reality, a computed reality, think of our reality, our bodies, the physical universe here as a computation, a simulation. It's easy to do almost anything in a virtual reality. It's almost unlimited. Digital computation has very few natural limitations. It can produce almost anything in that simulation. Reminds me of my son playing a video game years and years ago, Age of Empires, and he knew a cheat code that if he put in certain letters and characters, he could materialize a Mercedes-Benz driving around, amongst the cave dwellers in his game with a nuclear weapon launcher in the back seat. And the people who created the game just put that in for fun. It was something they did, and then the cheat code got out and other people could do it. But you can do things, a Mercedes-Benz in the cave days, with a rocket launcher in it would have been a pretty big miracle in those days. Miracles are simple in a virtual reality.
Well,
it's not a big deal. It just has to be something, like you say, that the system wants to do in order to further the evolution of the system.
Well, let's talk about time for a second, because it's a very fascinating subject. If time is more or less, for lack of a better word, the repository of all stored up probabilities, and therefore, the potential for consciousness to express itself in all manner of ways that we don't currently express ourselves, one would suggest that there are a lot of miracles, mysteries, and other powers that are available to us right now through this larger consciousness system that we've just yet to evolve enough perspective or skill to precipitate out as material reality. For instance, the work of people like my mentor Bruce De Palma and others who discovered that the laws of thermodynamics, specifically conservation of energy, conservation of momentum, do not hold true in every experiment, not strictly. And I don't know how much that challenges your worldview to hear me say that, but there are very a limited set of conditions under which, like for instance, non-Newtonian forces can be precipitated, like in the railgun, for instance. The work of Peter Greneau and others determined that there were some non-Newtonian force dynamics in these machines. But this is just an example. Like if we begin to follow a thread in time, in the evolution of scientific perspective, like your perspective, where will it lead? And do you have hopes that you're going to make some kind of discovery yourself that will continue to evolve our scientific perspective even in a more pronounced way?
Well, to that question, yes, there are ways that you can, what do we call it, hack the system, hack the rule set, if you will. Those things are possible. There's lots of things we can do as consciousness once we understand that that's what we are. There's lots of things that we can do that the average person, has no sense that's even possible. So yes, there's much of that available to us to learn and to grow and become. It's not like we're almost, at the pinnacle of everything the human can be. We haven't scratched the surface yet. There's lots of things that are available to us. We believe that we are so advanced and almost at the end of all the things possibilities that there are. It's funny that if you look at scientists back in the 1800s, they were sure that they had discovered everything that would ever be discovered. You see, and it finds out, well, they were pretty rudimentary with what they knew, and there's a whole lot of things discovered after that time, and we feel that way today. Every age feels like they're kind of the epitome of progress, and there's really not that much yet to do, and that never has ever been true, and it's not true now. There's a lot more that we have yet to discover and things that we can do, both in the physical and in the non-physical. As pieces of consciousness, we have lots of powers, if you say, lots of abilities that people have no idea about. So that's true. And the second part of your question, yes, I hope that through these experiments, I will completely rewrite science. If people understand that this virtual reality is a reality based on consciousness, that consciousness is fundamental, then physics will take a great leap forward, and so will all the rest of science, because they are being held back now by beliefs in materialism that just stymie them. And once they get over that belief, it'll be like when we got over the belief, that the world was flat, and we got over the belief that the Earth was at the center of the universe, and we got over these beliefs. And once you get past these kinds of beliefs, a whole lot more is possible that you didn't know was possible, because your belief constrained your vision of what was possible. And that I hope to be able to do with these experiments that I have. They will kind of demonstrate that this is a virtual reality and that it is based on consciousness, and that will change the way we look at reality.
Well, since we only have a few more minutes left, we'd like to know how people can follow you and your work. What are your websites or podcasts, or where do we find you? Do you have a YouTube channel?
I do. Okay, we'll start with the website. That's www.mybigtoe.com, mybigtoe.com, and you can find a lot of things from that as a starting point. I have a YouTube channel, and I probably have about 450 videos there, and some of them are long. I probably have thousands of hours of video that are all my lectures and talks and workshops and that sort of thing. Everything I do, I put out on YouTube. So this talk I'm going to do in the Northwest here in another week or two, that's going to be on YouTube eventually. So everything goes up there.
Outstanding. We're going to read those.
Find those places. Plus, there's books. Now I sell books, but you can get my books for free on Google Books. And if you don't mind reading it on a computer screen, it's free. Otherwise, you can get them at my website. You can get them from Amazon, or you can go to your local bookstore.
We're very honored to have you on our show. I think you are one of the most prodigious and outspoken members of the science and consciousness community simultaneously. I'm just starting to learn how much this is true by Richard continuously introducing me to more and more of your work. I'm becoming a student, I suppose, and that's good, because you obviously have quite a good grounding in all of this. Is there anything else you'd like to leave our audience with in the last 2 minutes of the show?
Well, just one thing, and that is, it sounds when we talk about it like it's all theory, and this is all kind of egghead stuff where we think about big pictures. But there is this also relates to your life, to everyday living, to the things that you do, every choice you make when you're awake. This is not just theory, but it's practical information and knowledge that helps you live and turn your life from one of struggle and one of pain and one of just can't ever seem to get there to one of satisfaction and joy and peace and love. So there's a very practical aspect to this as well as a theoretical aspect. And then I would like to apologize a little to all your listeners, because in a short period of time like this, I really can't derive anything. And I know I end up sounding like I'm just, making a lot of statements.
No.
But if you look at those YouTube videos or read the books, you'll find that this is all actually very tightly logical science.